The child had stopped shivering, and that was what made Lydia Harcourt step into the road. London, mid-January 1853. A little after 7 in the morning, the city had barely begun to stir beneath a pale winter sky. Lydia should have been hurrying toward Dean Street, where Mrs. Bell expected every seamstress at her table before 8. Instead, Lydia stood several yards from the black iron gates of the Stanley Winter Relief Yard, staring at a girl who could not have been more than 7. The child sat on the curb near the closed gates with her knees drawn close, bare fingers locked around a small brass disc. She wore a thin brown dress, one stocking sagged below the knee, and no coat covered her shoulders. Lydia knew cold. But this was different. The child was too quiet. Too still. Lydia crossed the road at once. "What is your name?" The girl looked up slowly. Her lips were pale. "Annie Moss." "And how long have you been sitting here, Annie?" "I don't know." Her voice was little more than breath. "Since before the bells." Lydia looked toward the yard. The main gates were locked, but beside them stood a narrow wicket window built into the wall. Its shutter was closed. "Did someone speak to you there?" Annie nodded. "I knocked. The clerk opened it. I gave him my token. He said it wasn't proper. I told him Mrs. Finch gave it to Ma'am. He said I must go away." Lydia felt anger rise, clean and sharp. "And no one came after you?" Annie shook her head. "Ma'am can't leave Jamie. He's coughing again." Lydia crouched in front of her. "Your brother?" "He's 5. Lydia took one of Annie's hands between both of hers. The child's fingers were frighteningly cold. "Listen to me. You cannot remain here." Annie's eyes filled, but she did not cry. "I need the coal." "I know." Lydia thought of Mrs. Bell's temper. Of Lady Whitcomb's unfinished sleeves. Of the purse in her lodging that contained too few coins and no room for mistakes. Then she unfastened the horn buttons of her dark blue coat. Annie stared. "What are you doing?" "Improving the situation." Lydia pulled the coat from her shoulders, and the January air struck through her dress immediately. "Put your arms through." "But you'll be cold." "I am already unpleasantly familiar with being cold." Lydia kept her tone light. "You, however, are much smaller and therefore losing the argument." A tiny smile moved across Annie's face. Lydia guided her arms into the sleeves and rolled each cuff twice. The coat was far too large, but it covered the child from throat to ankles. Lydia fastened the top buttons and drew the collar close. As she bent, something small and hard pressed against her hip from inside the pocket of her dress. Her mother's silver thimble. The one possession she had never sold after her father's death, even when nearly everything else had gone. Lydia touched it through the cloth, then let her hand fall. Some things were valuable because they reminded a person who she had been before the world began subtracting pieces. Across the street, behind the glass of an unmarked carriage, Hugh Belgrave watched in silence. The carriage bore no visible crest. That was deliberate. He had come without warning because 3 committee reports had praised the relief yard with such identical enthusiasm that he had begun to distrust every word. He had expected laziness. Perhaps vanity. He had not expected a child outside a locked gate while a woman in a worn grey dress removed the only winter garment she appeared to own. Hugh was 38 and had spent much of his adult life among people who behaved differently once they knew who he was. The woman across the road had not looked toward the carriage once. She did not know she was being watched. That fact held him more firmly than beauty would have done. Lydia took Annie's hand. "Show me the token." Annie opened her fingers. A brass disc lay in her palm, stamped with the number 417. Below it was a small crown and a worn letter shaped like a curled bee. Lydia did not touch it. "Keep hold of it. We are going back to the wicket." Annie recoiled. "No. Please." "He said I mustn't come again." The carriage door opened. Lydia turned sharply. A tall gentleman stepped into the road, dressed in a dark greatcoat of excellent cut. He had observant grey eyes and the unmistakable stillness of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Lydia disliked him at once for that reason alone. "She will not go back alone," he said. Lydia rose. And who asked you? His gaze shifted to her. Surprise passed briefly through his expression. No one. Then we agree on at least one fact. Annie edged closer to Lydia's side. The gentleman noticed. May I ask what happened? She was refused coal. Lydia glanced toward the wicket. The clerk said her token was not proper. May I see it? Annie's hand closed immediately. Hugh did not reach for her. Lydia said, it belongs to her. His eyes returned to Lydia's face. Yes. The answer was immediate. Then he lowered himself slightly so he did not tower over the child. Annie, you needn't give it to me. Could you hold it up? Annie looked at Lydia. Lydia nodded. Only if you choose. Slowly, Annie lifted her hand. Hugh studied the token without touching it. The number. The small crown. The worn Belgrave mark commissioned during his late father's lifetime. His jaw tightened. It is genuine. Lydia's heart gave one hard beat. You are certain? Entirely. He turned toward the locked gates. Then someone has lied. He crossed the road and rang the bell beside the wicket once. Nothing happened. He rang again. The shutter opened a crack. A clerk peered out with irritation already prepared. Then he saw Hugh. The color left his face. Your Grace. Lydia went still. She looked from the clerk to the gentleman, then toward the carriage waiting without crest across the road. Hugh Belgrave. Duke of Stanley. One of the highest-ranking noblemen in England. Lydia did not curtsy. The child was still cold. Your Grace, Lydia said, the gate remains shut. Hugh looked at her. Something changed in his face. Not anger. Recognition. Then he turned back to the clerk. Open it. But, Your Grace, distribution isn't scheduled until 8. The child was refused before 7. There must be some mistake. There is. Hugh's voice went colder. I am looking at it. The clerk unlocked the wicket door, then hurried to the main gate. Iron scraped against stone as one side swung inward. Hugh looked at Annie. May I examine the token properly? Annie hesitated, then held it out. Hugh took it only after she opened her hand fully. He turned it beneath the morning light, confirming the crown, the number 417, and the worn Belgrave mark. Then he gave it directly back. Keep it. Annie closed her fingers around it. Hugh faced the clerk. The register. Your Grace. The distribution register. Now. The man swallowed and disappeared into the office. Lydia felt the cold bite deeper through her grey dress, but she barely noticed. A minute later, the clerk returned with a leather-bound book. Hugh opened it to the current date. His eyes moved down the page. 12 entries. Every one marked supplied. He looked up slowly. Where are refusals recorded? We haven't had any refusals this morning, Your Grace. Silence settled across the yard entrance. Annie pressed against Lydia's side. Lydia looked at the register, then at the clerk. Hugh's face became perfectly still. That is unfortunate, he said. The clerk blinked. Hugh closed the book with one quiet movement. Because I witnessed one myself. The clerk looked from the closed register to the Duke's face, and Lydia saw the exact instant he understood that silence would no longer protect him. Your Grace, there may have been some confusion at the wicket. Hugh opened the book again. Then confusion should leave a record. We do not usually enter invalid claims. The token is valid. Yes, Your Grace. Then why was the child refused? The clerk swallowed. Annie stood close beside Lydia, still wrapped in the oversized dark blue coat, one small hand closed around token 417. Hugh's gaze moved to the child, then back to the clerk. Answer me. I was told to reject questionable numbers until they could be checked. By whom? The man's eye shifted toward the inner office. Before he could reply, footsteps sounded across the packed yard. A gentleman in a well-brushed black coat approached with the unhurried confidence of someone who preferred to arrive after other people had already made mistakes. He was perhaps 45, clean-shaven, carefully dressed, and composed enough that his politeness felt rehearsed. "Your Grace. Had we known you intended to visit, we would have prepared properly." Hugh's expression did not change. "That is precisely why you were not informed." The gentleman bowed. Talbot Crane, Secretary to the Stanley Winter Relief Committee. Lydia watched Crane's eyes take in the open gate, the register, Annie, and finally the dark blue coat wrapped around the child. His face revealed nothing until Annie shifted and the brass token appeared briefly between her fingers. Then something tightened near his mouth. "Very little." "Enough." "Mr. Crane," Hugh said, "perhaps you can explain why a child carrying a genuine token was refused before 7 this morning." Crane's gaze settled on Annie with practiced regret. "Your Grace, relief administration requires caution. False tokens do circulate. If every claim were accepted without verification, the entire system could be compromised. This token is not false. I defer to your Grace's knowledge of the family mark." "Do not defer. Answer." Crane hesitated. Lydia felt Annie press closer to her side. "It is possible," Crane said carefully, "that a genuine token has been stolen." Annie recoiled as though the accusation had been shouted. Lydia's anger sharpened. "She is 7. Crane turned toward her. "And you are?" "The woman who found her after your system left her outside in January." His eyes cooled. "Kindness does you credit, miss, but charity cannot be governed by sentiment. Nor should it be governed by convenient suspicion." The clerk lowered his gaze. Hugh looked at Lydia for one brief moment, then returned his attention to Crane. "Who issued token 417? Crane said nothing. Annie answered before anyone else could. "Mrs. Finch." Crane's expression changed. Lydia saw it clearly this time. Not surprise. Alarm. Hugh noticed too. "Who is Mrs. Finch?" he asked. Annie looked up at Lydia. "The widow near St. Anne's Lane. She keeps names in a brown book." Crane spoke too quickly. "Mrs. Finch is elderly." Lydia's head turned. "What does that have to do with whether she issued the token? Age can cause confusion. So can dishonesty." Crane's jaw hardened. Hugh's voice cut between them. "Enough." The single word silenced the yard. He looked at Crane. "You will not dismiss a record keeper's evidence before I have seen it." Crane bowed slightly. "Of course, Your Grace." "And Annie Moss will receive the coal owed to her household." The clerk glanced toward the stacked sacks. "1 sack, Your Grace." Annie spoke softly. "Ma'am said 1 a week." Hugh looked at her. "How many are you owed today?" 1. Crane stepped in. "The weekly allotment should be sufficient." "Then 1 sack today," Hugh said. "No more and no less than she is entitled to." Lydia noticed the precision. He did not transform justice into largesse. He restored what had been withheld. The distinction mattered. Hugh turned toward the clerk. "Record it." The clerk opened the register and dipped his pen. "Under what category, Your Grace?" Hugh's face became very still. "Fulfilled obligation." The pen scratched across the page. Crane's gaze returned to token 417. Lydia saw it. Hugh did too. He stepped toward Annie but stopped at a respectful distance. "May I examine the token once more?" Annie hesitated. Lydia said, "It is your choice." The child slowly opened her hand. Hugh accepted the disc, studied the number and the worn Belgrave mark, then handed it directly back. "Keep it with you." Annie curled her fingers around it. "Yes, sir." Hugh turned toward one of the yard laborers, a broad-shouldered man in a rough brown coat who had been listening from beside a coal cart. "Your name?" "Thomas Breyer, Your Grace." "Mr. Breyer, you will escort Miss Moss and the coal to her home in St. Anne's Lane. You will remain until the sack is delivered inside the household rooms. Then report to Belgrave House that it arrived." Thomas nodded. Yes, Your Grace. Annie looked up at Lydia. Will you come? The question struck harder than Lydia expected. She glanced toward the pale sky, then toward the city beyond the yard. Mrs. Bell's workroom. Lady Whitcomb's sleeves. Wages she could not afford to lose. I cannot, she said gently. Annie's face fell. Lydia crouched and fastened the top button of the coat beneath the child's chin. But Mr. Briar will see you home. And you will give this coat to your mother until she decides you are warm enough to remove it. Annie stared. But it's yours. Yes. Your only one. Lydia smiled. You ask dangerous questions. Is it? Lydia did not lie. Yes. Annie's lower lip trembled. Then I can't keep it. You can keep it until you are safe at home. Lydia looked at her carefully. After that, your mother may decide what is proper. Annie threw her arms around Lydia without warning. For a heartbeat, Lydia froze. Then she held the child gently, feeling the weight of the blue wool she had worn through for winters. When Annie pulled back, she whispered, "Thank you." Lydia stood. "Take care of the buttons." "I will." Thomas loaded the coal sack onto a handcart. Annie climbed onto the front board for the first part of the journey, token 417 still in her possession and Lydia's coat wrapped securely around her. Lydia watched until the cart passed through the open gate and turned toward St. Anne's Lane. Hugh was watching too. "She trusts you," he said. Lydia folded her arms against the cold. She was cold. Gratitude is not the same as trust. You distinguish everything. Only things that matter. Something almost like approval moved through his eyes. Then he looked at the register. "This book comes with me." Crane's expression tightened. "Your Grace, the register is committee property. The committee operates under my patronage, distributes fuel partly purchased from my subscriptions, and uses my family mark on its tokens. Do you wish to continue objecting?" Crane bowed. "No, Your Grace." Hugh handed the register to his coachman. "Take this directly to Belgrave House. Give it to the butler. He is to place it in my study and keep the room locked until Mr. Everard arrives." "Yes, Your Grace." Lydia noticed that the register had not been sealed. Hugh noticed her looking. "You disapprove. I am wondering who touches it between here and your study." He considered that. The coachman. The butler. Then Mr. Everard. And anyone who can reach it before the door is locked. Hugh's gaze sharpened. "You trust evidence more than people. Evidence has fewer reasons to flatter a duke." This time the corner of his mouth moved. Then his expression sobered. "Mrs. Finch." Lydia looked toward the road where Annie had disappeared. Crane was not pleased to hear her name. No, he looked frightened. "I thought so too." Lydia turned toward him. "Then perhaps you should begin there." Hugh glanced at the waiting carriage. "I intend to." "Good. Will you come?" She stared at him. "Why?" "Because you noticed Crane's reaction before I was certain I had." "You do not need a seamstress for an inquiry." No, Hugh's voice was quiet. "I need the woman who saw a child everyone else had already decided not to see." Lydia felt the cold more sharply then, perhaps because the words had reached somewhere she kept guarded. She looked toward Dean Street, toward the work waiting without her, and then toward St. Anne's Lane. "Mrs. Finch first," she said. "Then I go to work." Hugh inclined his head. "Agreed." Behind them, Talbot Crane stood beside the open gate, watching the road Annie had taken. His eyes were fixed not on the child, not on the coal cart, but on the small brass token hidden in her closed hand. Lydia had taken no more than 20 steps from the relief yard before the cold began to bite through her grey dress in earnest. Hugh noticed before she did, or perhaps before she was willing to admit it. "You are shivering." "I am walking." That does not answer the observation. It was not a question. He looked at her, and Lydia immediately regretted how much satisfaction she took in having interrupted a duke's certainty twice before breakfast. Across the road, the unmarked carriage waited. Hugh gestured toward it. We can reach St. Anne's Lane more quickly by carriage. Lydia looked at the vehicle, then toward the streets leading to Dean Street. And afterward? Afterward what? You return me to work in a ducal carriage. There is no crest. The coachman knows you. The horses look as though they have never pulled anything less important than Parliament. Someone will notice. Hugh considered the carriage as though seeing it for the first time through her eyes. You believe arriving with me would damage your standing. I believe Mrs. Bell needs very little encouragement to assume the worst. Then we will walk. Lydia turned toward him. You do not have to dismiss your carriage because I dislike gossip. I am not dismissing it because you dislike gossip. I am dismissing it because your livelihood should not become collateral damage to my convenience. The answer silenced her. Hugh told his coachman to take the carriage directly to Belgrave House and ensure the yard register was placed with the butler as instructed. Then he fell into step beside Lydia, leaving enough distance between them to satisfy propriety without making conversation absurd. London was fully waking now. Shop shutters rose. Delivery boys hurried through side streets. A woman shook a mat from an upstairs window and nearly dusted a passing gentleman's hat. Hugh looked entirely out of place and, to Lydia's surprise, entirely unconcerned by it. You so, he said after several minutes. Lydia looked at him sharply. I beg your pardon. Professionally. How do you know that? His gaze dropped to her hands. There are pinpricks along the side of your left forefinger. Your cuffs are repaired with stitches too fine for ordinary household mending. And you carried no reticule this morning, which suggests you were walking to work rather than making a social call. Lydia folded her hands together. You notice too much. I have been told that before. By people who liked you? Not usually. She almost smiled. Where do you work? He asked. Dean Street. For whom? Mrs. Bell. Does she know you are investigating fraudulent coal tokens before breakfast? Mrs. Bell would consider the sentence itself an insult. Hugh glanced at her. Then you should hurry. I was hurrying before I found Annie. You say that as though you regret stopping. I regret consequences. Not choices. Hugh went quiet. Lydia sensed the distinction had reached him. They turned into a narrower street where the pavement was uneven and the windows closer together. Hugh looked at the buildings, then at the women carrying baskets, the men waiting near a baker's door, and the children moving quickly through the cold. You said evidence has fewer reasons to flatter a duke. I did. Do you often distrust people of rank? Only when they make themselves impossible to observe closely. That sounds like yes. Lydia stopped beneath the awning of a closed print shop. Your Grace, may I be honest? You have shown no inclination to be otherwise. Men of rank are often easily lied to because everyone around them has learned what answer is safest. Hugh's face did not change. And what answer is safest with you? The truth. That is what powerful men always say. The words landed more sharply than she intended. Hugh looked down the street, where a boy was pushing a handcart through a patch of frozen mud. Then perhaps the test is whether I still want the truth when it becomes inconvenient. Lydia studied him. Perhaps. Mrs. Finch lived above a cooper's workshop near St. Anne's Lane. The landlady who opened the door looked suspicious of Lydia and alarmed by Hugh. She began to curtsy on the narrow stair. Hugh stopped her with a slight gesture. Please do not trouble yourself. We are here to speak with Mrs. Finch about the winter relief lists. The landlady's eyes widened. She said someone would come eventually. Lydia and Hugh exchanged a glance. Did she? Lydia asked. For 3 weeks. Mrs. Finch's rooms were small but orderly. The woman herself sat near a modest grate with a brown leather-bound ledger open across her lap. She was perhaps 60, silver-haired, straight-backed, and possessed of the expression of someone who had spent too many years being patronized by men with worse handwriting. She did not rise. Which one of you is here to tell me I am confused? Hugh closed the door behind them. Neither, I hope. You must be the Duke. Yes. You look younger than your reports. Lydia lowered her head to hide a smile. Hugh did not. I was unaware reports had been made. People report on dukes constantly. Most of it is useless. Mrs. Finch looked at Lydia. And you? Lydia Harcourt. The lady who gave Annie Moss her coat. Lydia blinked. How do you know that? Thomas Breyer stopped here after delivering the child and coal to St. Anne's Lane. Mrs. Moss sent word that Annie arrived safely. Relief moved through Lydia so quickly that she almost closed her eyes. And the token? Still with the Moss family, I assume. Hugh stepped closer. Mrs. Finch, did you issue token 417? The widow's hand settled on the brown ledger. I did. She turned several pages and pointed. Annie Moss. Widow mother. 2 children. 1 weekly sack during severe frost. Token 417. Lydia bent over the page. The entries above and below were equally precise. Token for 16 belonged to Mrs. Gibbons, a laundress with an infant daughter. Token for 18 belonged to Caleb Price, an elderly former footman. Hugh read in silence. How many token holders have been refused? He asked. Mrs. Finch's mouth tightened. I do not know. But families have been coming back to me for 3 weeks saying the Yard called their tokens false, copied, expired, or already redeemed. Did you report this? Lydia asked. To Mr. Crane. And what did he say? That grief had confused my records. Hugh's expression cooled. Your husband? Dead 5 years. Mrs. Finch looked at him directly. I kept his household accounts for 32 years before half those committee gentlemen could write their own names without blotting the page. I am not confused. I believe you. She studied him as if testing whether he meant it. Then she turned the ledger around. There is more. 3 days ago, a young committee runner came asking whether I had truly issued 417. He carried one of those red leather message cases they give the runners. Brass clasp. There are several identical ones. Hugh's gaze sharpened. What did you tell him? That I had issued it. And then? The next day, the same boy returned and said I must have made a mistake. Lydia felt the cold of the street return in memory. Before Annie presented the token this morning. Yes. Hugh's voice went quiet. Someone was concerned about 417 before the refusal occurred. Mrs. Finch closed the ledger halfway. That is what I thought. May I take this book? Hugh asked. Mrs. Finch's hand remained firmly on it. No, Lydia looked at him. Hugh did not object. Then may I have a copy of the disputed numbers? The widow's expression eased by a fraction. Yes. She took a sheet of paper and began writing. 23 numbers. Names were not copied, only token numbers and street abbreviations. As Lydia watched, she noticed several addresses clustered near St. Anne's Lane, Mercer Row, and streets closer to the river. These are not entirely random. Mrs. Finch looked up. What do you mean? Several appear to lie along neighboring delivery routes. Hugh leaned closer, but Lydia shook her head. Not enough to prove anything. Only enough to notice. Good, he said. You distinguish facts from conclusions. Someone must. Mrs. Finch finished the list and handed it to Hugh. This is a copy only. The original ledger remains with me. Hugh took the sheet. Understood. Lydia watched him fold it once and place it inside the inner pocket of his greatcoat. You notice that too, he said. Yes. The copy is now in my possession. Good. Mrs. Finch raised one silver eyebrow. Are you always like this? Lydia answered before Hugh could. Only when things matter. For the first time, the widow smiled. Then Hugh looked back at the list inside his coat and asked, Who besides you should know which numbers were issued? Mrs. Finch's smile disappeared. The issuing office. The distribution yard. And the committee secretary. Lydia thought of Crane's face when Annie had spoken Mrs. Finch's name. She thought of the clerk who claimed no refusal had occurred. She thought of a young runner questioning 417 before Annie ever reached the gate. Hugh looked at her, and she knew he had reached the same conclusion. Not proof. Not yet. But direction. Your Grace, Lydia said quietly, I think someone knew which numbers might become troublesome before the families even presented them. Hugh's gaze settled on the closed brown ledger in Mrs. Finch's hands. Yes. His voice was almost too quiet to hear. And I intend to find out why. By the time Lydia reached Dean Street, the church clock had struck 10, and she knew before touching the workroom door that the morning had already cost her more than 2 hours of wages. The cold had followed her from St. Anne's Lane, working through the grey wool of her dress until her fingers ached and her shoulders felt stiff. She had refused Hugh's offer of a carriage again after leaving Mrs. Finch, insisting that a duke escorting an unmarried seamstress to her employer would create a problem larger than lateness. He had accepted the decision, though not happily, and remained several paces behind her until they reached the corner near Mrs. Bell's establishment. There he stopped. I will wait outside. Lydia looked at him. Why? Because you said my entrance would cause trouble. Most men of your rank would consider my trouble insignificant. Most men of my rank were not corrected twice before breakfast. Something in his expression almost made her smile. Almost. Do not wait long, she said. I may be some time. I have learned not to make assumptions where you are concerned. Lydia turned before he could see the warmth that answer caused. The bell above Mrs. Bell's door gave a sharp metallic ring as she entered. Heat struck her face. So did silence. For women sat at long work tables beneath tall windows, needles suspended above silk and muslin. Mrs. Bell emerged from behind a curtain wearing a pincushion around one wrist and an expression that would have frightened someone with more to lose. Lydia had plenty to lose. That was why she did not lower her eyes. Miss Harcourt. Mrs. Bell's voice was quiet. How kind of you to remember where you are employed. Lydia removed her bonnet. I am sorry I am late. Late. Mrs. Bell looked toward the clock. Lady Whitcomb's maid came at 8:30 asking why the sleeves promised for inspection were not ready. At 9, she returned. At 9:30, she informed me that Lady Whitcomb was considering taking her custom elsewhere. Lydia glanced toward the table where the unfinished sleeves lay beneath protective muslin. The beading pattern was changed twice yesterday. And I worked until nearly 9 last night to correct it. Yet the sleeves remain unfinished. Because the pattern was changed twice. Mrs. Bell's mouth tightened. Where have you been? Lydia could have lied. She did not. At the Stanley Winter Relief Yard. A child had been refused coal. One of the younger seamstresses looked up. Mrs. Bell stared. A child? Yes. Known to you? No relation? No, then what possible reason could justify abandoning paid work for an unknown child? Lydia felt something cold settle inside her, though the room was warm. She was freezing. Mrs. Bell's gaze moved over Lydia's grey dress. Where is your coat? With her. The silence changed. One woman lowered her needle. Another looked away quickly. Mrs. Bell blinked. You gave away your winter coat. I gave it to the child until she reached home safely. Your only one. Lydia did not answer immediately. Mrs. Bell understood anyway. Miss Harcourt, you are 30 years old. You cannot afford this sort of foolishness. No, Lydia's voice remained calm. I cannot. Then why did you do it? Because she was 7. Something in the room went still. Mrs. Bell recovered first. Sentiment will not pay your rent. Lydia knew that better than anyone. The truth of it hurt because it was true. Her purse held too few coins. Her father's debts had taught her to count every farthing twice. Generosity had not made her less poor. It had only made the cost visible. I am aware. Mrs. Bell looked toward the unfinished sleeves, then back at Lydia. I cannot employ a woman who may abandon her work whenever misery appears in the street. I have never abandoned work before. You did today. Yes. And Lady Whitcomb may leave because of it. The sleeves were delayed because the design changed. Do not argue. Lydia's hand moved instinctively toward the pocket of her dress. The silver thimble pressed against her hip, small and familiar. She had worn it through winters when there had been less cold and pride, through rooms emptied by creditors, through evenings when she sewed until her vision blurred because there was no one else to pay the rent. She had spent years making herself useful enough that no one could accuse her of needing mercy. Now one morning of compassion had become proof of unreliability. Mrs. Bell crossed to a small cash box and counted several coins onto the table. 2 days' wages. I will retain the rest against the unfinished work. Lydia stared at the coins. You owe me for 4 days and last night. I owe you what I judge fair. No, every face turned toward her. Mrs. Bell's expression sharpened. Take care. Lydia walked to the table. I completed Lady Cranford's bodice, repaired the mourning veil, reset the lace on Mrs. Redding's dinner gown, and worked 5 hours beyond ordinary time on Lady Whitcomb's sleeves after the beading pattern changed. You may dismiss me. You may be angry. You may tell every client in London that I chose a freezing child over 2 hours at your table. But you may not pretend my completed work was never done. Mrs. Bell flushed. You are in no position to bargain. I am not bargaining. Lydia kept her voice low. I am stating what is owed. One of the older seamstresses slowly lowered her eyes to hide something that might have been approval. Mrs. Bell counted again, harder this time, and added the missing coins. Lydia took only what belonged to her. Then she gathered her sewing scissors, thread case, measuring tape, and the small scrap of folded muslin she used to protect needles. Mrs. Bell watched her. You will regret this, pride. Lydia tied her bonnet. Perhaps. Work is not easily found. I know. And Lady Whitcomb's name closes doors. Then I will knock on others. Mrs. Bell stared at her. Lydia felt fear. Real fear. Not dramatic fear. The plain kind that calculated rent, candles, bread, and how many days could pass before a person began selling objects she had promised never to sell. She did not let the fear bend her spine. Good morning, Mrs. Bell. Outside, the winter air struck hard enough to steal her breath. Hugh stood beneath the awning of a stationer's shop across the street, exactly where he had said he would wait. He saw the work bag in her hand and knew before she spoke. You were dismissed. Lydia looked down at her purse. She had already counted the amount in her mind. Rent was due in 12 days. If she ate carefully, bought no candles beyond necessity, and found occasional mending, she might survive 3 weeks before desperation became arithmetic. Yes. Hugh's jaw tightened. Because you stopped for Annie. Because I was late. Those are not the same thing. To Mrs. Bell, they are. He glanced toward the workroom door. I could speak to her. No, the answer came too quickly. Hugh looked at her. Lydia steadied herself. Do not give me back employment by frightening the woman who took it away. I would have to wonder every morning whether I had earned my place or whether your title had purchased silence. I was not proposing to frighten her. You barely speak and people become frightened. To her surprise, Hugh almost smiled. Then his attention moved to the purse in her hand. How long can you manage? Lydia's pride rose at once. That is not your concern. No, he accepted the boundary immediately. It is not. That made resisting him more difficult. He continued, but the inquiry has changed. The register should now be at Belgrave House, and Mr. Everard, my solicitor, is expected before noon. I would like you to look at it. Why me? Because you noticed Crane's fear. You noticed the delivery clusters in Mrs. Finch's ledger. And you are suspicious of everyone who touches evidence. With reason. Yes. Hugh paused. I am asking, Lydia. Not commanding. The use of her name made her look at him. He seemed to realize it only after speaking. Forgive me. Miss Harcourt. 1 hour, she said. Then I decide what comes next. Agreed. A carriage turned sharply into Dean Street before either could move. Lydia recognized the horses from that morning. The coachman drew up, descended, and crossed toward Hugh carrying a sealed note. Your Grace. From Belgrave House. Hugh broke the seal and read. The stillness in his face changed. Lydia knew enough of him now to recognize alarm when he hid it. What happened? He handed her the note. The message was brief. The yard register had reached Belgrave House. The coachman had delivered it to the butler, who placed it in Hugh's study and locked the room. Mr. Everard had arrived shortly afterward. In the butler's presence, the solicitor opened the register. 3 pages were missing. Lydia read the note twice. Were they torn? It does not say. Then we do not know when they vanished. No, Hugh looked toward the carriage. Only that they were present when the book was bound and absent when Everard opened it. Lydia folded the note and returned it. Her fingers were cold again, but now the cold had nothing to do with January. Your Grace. Yes? We should go. Hugh opened the carriage door. This time Lydia did not object. Somewhere between the relief yard and Belgrave House, 3 pages had disappeared from a register that claimed no child had been refused. And for the first time that morning, Lydia understood that someone was not merely hiding a mistake. Someone was already cleaning away the truth. Belgrave House stood quiet behind its Mayfair railings when Hugh's carriage drew up shortly before noon, but the stillness ended the moment Lydia entered the study. Mr. Everard was already there, lean and iron grey, with the relief yard register open beneath the window and the butler standing nearby as witness. Lydia stopped several feet from the desk. No one has touched it since you opened it. Everard looked up. The butler placed it here after the coachman delivered it. The study was locked. I arrived, the butler admitted me, and we opened the volume together. Hugh removed his gloves. And the pages? Everard turned the register carefully. 3 leaves had been cut close to the spine. Pale fibers showed where paper had recently been severed. Lydia leaned closer without touching. Fresh? Hugh asked. Everard's mouth tightened. I will say recent. I will not pretend certainty beyond that. Lydia studied the exposed edge. The fibers are still pale. Everard glanced at her. You work with cloth. I did until this morning. Hugh's eye shifted toward her, but she kept her attention on the book. Freshly cut material often looks brighter before dust and handling dull it. Paper is not cloth, so I am not claiming more than resemblance. Everard regarded her for a moment, then nodded. A useful distinction. Hugh came to the opposite side of the desk. Which dates are missing? Yesterday, the day before, and most of the preceding day. Everard tapped the surviving pages. The loss is not random. Whoever removed them knew which entries they wished to eliminate. Lydia thought of Annie outside the gate, too cold to shiver. Or which refusals? Everard opened another sheet. I compared the surviving register against the copied list you brought from Mrs. Finch. Lydia looked at Hugh. The folded list was still inside the inner pocket of his greatcoat. You have not transferred it yet. Hugh's gaze met hers. No, he removed the paper slowly and placed it flat on the desk. Mrs. Finch gave this copy directly to me at her rooms. It has remained in my inner greatcoat pocket since then. Everard opened a black dispatch box. And I am now taking custody of it. Hugh handed him the list. Everard placed it inside a labelled envelope and locked the box. The copied list of 23 disputed token numbers is now secured in my dispatch box. Lydia nodded. Hugh almost smiled. Satisfied. Temporarily. Everard returned to the register. 7 numbers from Mrs. Finch's copied list appear on surviving pages. All 7 are marked supplied. Lydia felt something cold settle beneath her ribs. And token 417. Nowhere on the surviving pages. Hugh's face hardened. Then either it was on one of the missing leaves or it was never entered at all. Precisely. Everard turned another page. The difficulty is that both possibilities serve the same lie. A knock sounded. The butler entered with a pale young man carrying a packet of routine committee papers. He could not have been more than 23. His coat was neat but worn at the cuffs, and his eyes moved quickly around the room before settling on Hugh. Your Grace. Mr. Samuel Pike, junior clerk to the Relief Committee. Pike bowed. I was instructed to deliver subscription summaries for Mr. Crane. Leave them with Mr. Everard, Hugh said. Pike stepped forward. Everard accepted the packet. Then Lydia saw the young clerk glance toward the open register. His face changed when Hugh said, "Does Mr. Crane know I am examining token 417? Pike's fingers tightened around his hat. Only for a second. "I don't know, Your Grace." Lydia watched him. Hugh was looking at the papers, not at Pike. "You work under Mr. Crane?" "Yes, Your Grace." "Do you handle token records?" "Sometimes." "Then you may go." Pike bowed too quickly and left. Lydia waited until the door closed. He knew the number. Hugh looked at her. "What makes you certain?" "I am not certain. I only saw him react." Everard glanced toward the door. "To 417. "Yes." Hugh's eyes narrowed. "You noticed that before I did?" "Only because you were reading." An unforgivable distraction. The knock came again before Lydia could answer. This time Talbot Crane entered without the hesitation Pike had shown. He carried a folded document in one hand and concern arranged carefully across his face. "Your Grace, I came as soon as I heard the register had been removed from the yard." Hugh's voice was cool. "You heard quickly. The committee has responsibilities." Crane's gaze moved to Lydia. "I did not realize Miss Harcourt would be included in a private examination." Lydia said nothing. Hugh did. "Miss Harcourt is here because she has already noticed what several salaried men failed to see." Crane's mouth tightened. "Observation is not expertise." "No. But falsehood does not become truth merely because an expert writes it down." Crane held up the folded paper. "Then perhaps this will assist." Everard extended a hand. "What is it?" "A statement regarding token 417. Lydia felt Hugh go still. Crane continued. "It was reported stolen 3 weeks ago by Mrs. Finch herself. The matter should have been entered more clearly, but the token's appearance today is not evidence of administrative wrongdoing." Hugh did not look at Lydia, but she knew he remembered the brown ledger, the exact entry, and Mrs. Finch's own words. Lydia knew them too. Crane did not know they had visited her. Everard unfolded the statement. "This bears Mrs. Finch's name." "Yes." "Her signature." "She may have dictated it." "To whom?" Crane paused. "A committee clerk." "Which clerk?" "I would need to check." Hugh spoke quietly. "Who gave you this document?" "It was in the committee papers." "That was not my question." Crane's expression changed by a fraction. "A clerk brought it to my attention." "Which clerk?" "I have said I would need to check." Hugh took one step closer to the desk. 3 days ago, did you send a runner to ask Mrs. Finch whether she had issued token 417? Crane's eye sharpened. "I send many runners." "Did one of them carry a red leather committee message case with a brass clasp?" For the first time, Crane reacted before he could stop himself. His gaze flicked toward Hugh. Lydia saw it. Everard saw it too. Then Crane recovered. "Several runners use such cases." "Exactly," Hugh said. "So I am asking whether one of yours visited Mrs. Finch." "Administrative inquiries are routine." Was 417 routine before Annie Moss reached the gate? Silence. Lydia spoke. "Mrs. Finch told us she issued the token." Crane turned toward her. The color left his face so slightly that another person might have missed it. Lydia did not. "You visited her?" "This morning." Crane's eyes moved to Hugh. "Your Grace, surely you do not intend to accept the unsupported memory of an elderly widow over committee records." "Mrs. Finch's original ledger is not memory," Lydia said. "And it remains with her." Crane's composure hardened. "You speak with remarkable confidence for a woman who had no connection to this matter yesterday." Lydia felt the old pressure beneath the words. "Seamstress. Poor. Unmarried. Easily dismissed. I had no connection to Annie yesterday either." Crane gave a thin smile. And yet your generosity has already brought you into the private study of a duke. The insult was quiet enough to pretend innocence. Hugh's face changed. Lydia answered first. If your defense of missing pages and a false statement requires threatening my reputation, then I suggest the papers matter more than you wish to admit. Crane's gaze sharpened. False statement. The words came too quickly. Everard looked down at the paper. Hugh said, interesting. Crane stiffened. I meant only that Miss Harcourt has no basis for calling it false. She does, Hugh said. She heard Mrs. Finch deny it in person. Crane said nothing. Hugh continued. And so did I. The room became very still. Everard refolded the statement and placed it inside a separate labelled folio. For clarity, this document has passed from Mr. Crane into my custody. It will remain secured pending comparison with Mrs. Finch's testimony and original ledger. Crane's jaw tightened. You are turning routine confusion into scandal. Hugh looked at the 3 missing pages. No. Someone else began that work before I arrived. Crane drew himself upright. Then perhaps tomorrow's charity bazaar will remind everyone that the committee is judged by its service, not by the suspicions of outsiders. Lydia heard the threat beneath the civility. Hugh did too. Lady Wexham's assembly rooms. Yes. Sir Roland Ashcombe will present the committee accounts before subscribers and patrons. Crane's eyes returned to Lydia. A very public occasion. He bowed and left. The door closed. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Everard looked toward Lydia. He intends to make you the question instead of the records. Lydia touched the silver thimble through the fabric of her dress pocket. She thought of 3 weeks before desperation became arithmetic. Of a child wearing her coat. Of a clerk who flinched at 417. Then tomorrow, she said, he had better hope no one asks the right question first. After Crane left, the study felt larger, as though his civility had been occupying more space than his body. Hugh remained near the desk, one hand resting beside the relief yard register. Lydia stood by the window, looking down at the carriage wheels passing along the square. The cold in her dress had faded inside Belgrave House, but the memory of Mrs. Bell's dismissal had not. 3 weeks. That was what her purse allowed if nothing else went wrong. In Lydia's experience, something else always went wrong. Miss Harcourt, Hugh said. She turned. Yes, Your Grace. I owe you an apology. Everard glanced up from the folio containing Crane's false statement, then deliberately returned to his notes. Lydia looked at Hugh. For what? Your name has become attached to an inquiry involving men with greater power to damage a reputation than you possess to defend one. I chose to continue. Choice does not erase consequence. The word surprised her because they were nearly her own. Hugh continued. Crane made that clear. He tried. He will try again. Lydia folded her hands. Then I shall have the advantage of knowing what sort of man he is. That is not much of an advantage against social cruelty. No. But it is better than believing good manners mean good character. Hugh's mouth tightened, not with disagreement. If you wish to step away, I will understand. And leave Mrs. Finch to be called confused? Annie to be called a thief? No. You have already lost employment. Which is precisely why I dislike being told what I can afford to care about. The answer came sharper than she intended. Hugh accepted it without flinching. Everard closed his notebook. Miss Harcourt, there may be a practical matter worth discussing. Lydia looked at him warily. That sounds expensive. Not necessarily. You noticed the clustering of numbers in Mrs. Finch's list. You also noticed Pike's reaction and the fresh appearance of the cut paper fibers. I require someone to compare copied records, street names, delivery dates, and handwriting differences. That is paid clerical work. Lydia's suspicion deepened. I am a seamstress. You are exact. That is the qualification I require. And the rate? Everard named a modest but respectable daily amount. Not charity. Not enough to insult her intelligence. Enough to keep arithmetic from becoming immediate desperation. Lydia hesitated. How many days? As needed, and only for work actually performed. No gifts. No advances. Agreed. Hugh said nothing. Lydia noticed that too. He had learned enough not to interfere. I will consider it, she said. Everard nodded. That is all I ask. A knock interrupted them. The butler entered carrying a rectangular parcel wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Your Grace, this was delivered for Miss Harcourt. Lydia stared. For me? Yes, miss. The man who brought it gave his name as Thomas Briar. He said he had escorted a little girl called Annie Moss home this morning. Lydia crossed the room before anyone could say more. Her name was written on the paper in an uncertain hand, for Miss Harcourt, the lady who helped Annie Moss. She touched the knot. Did Mr. Briar say who sent it? Mrs. Moss, miss. He said the child arrived safely with the coal. Mrs. Moss asked him to return this to Belgrave House because he knew you were assisting His Grace. The chain settled into place in Lydia's mind. She had given the coat to Annie at the yard. Thomas Briar had escorted Annie and the coal to St. Anne's Lane. Mrs. Moss had taken the coat from her daughter and sent it back through the same man. Briar had delivered it here. Hugh seemed to understand what she was checking. No unexplained movement, he said quietly. Lydia looked at him. You remembered. I am learning. She untied the parcel. Her dark blue coat lay folded inside, clean and carefully brushed. The repaired cuffs were unchanged. The horn buttons were all present. One had been polished so vigorously that it shone brighter than the others. Lydia smiled despite herself. Annie. Beneath the coat lay a folded note. Lydia opened it. Miss Harcourt, ma'am says I must send it back because you will freeze too. Thank you for seeing me. Annie. Her vision blurred for one dangerous second. Lydia blinked until the word steadied. Hugh looked away first, granting privacy without announcing it. Lydia lifted the coat. Something crackled inside the inner pocket. She froze. Hugh noticed. What is it? I do not know. She slipped her fingers inside and drew out a small folded scrap of coarse paper. The paper was not Annie's note. Lydia unfolded it on the desk without letting go. 3 numbers had been written in pencil. For 12, for 17. For 23, beneath them, one sentence. Ask who receives the coal when the children are refused. Everard rose immediately. Do not pass it to me yet. Lydia looked at him. I was not going to. Good. Hugh came closer but stopped before touching either coat or paper. Was that in your coat this morning? Lydia shook her head. No, you are certain. I carry my thimble in my dress pocket and keep only thread, handkerchief, and occasionally chalk in the coat pocket. This was not there. Hugh's gaze dropped to the paper. Then someone placed it there between Annie receiving the coat and Thomas Briar delivering it here. Possibly Mrs. Moss. Possibly Annie. Possibly Briar. Everard added, or someone who had access to the coat before it reached Mrs. Moss, during the journey, or before delivery here. Lydia looked at the 3 numbers again. We do not know. No, Hugh said. And we will not pretend that we do. She appreciated the restraint. Mrs. Finch's list. Hugh looked toward Everard's dispatch box. Does it contain 412 and 423? Everard did not open the box. I remember for 17. I will verify the others when we examine the list formally. Lydia folded the scrap back along its original crease. For now, it remains with me. Hugh nodded. It is yours until you choose otherwise. Lydia placed it inside her thread case, then shut the clasp. The silver thimble remained separately in her dress pocket. I will lock this in my lodging tonight. Agreed, Everard said. Hugh's eyes were still on the message. Ask who receives the coal when the children are refused. Lydia looked at him. Someone believes the answer is not no one. Or someone knows the answer. Silence held for a moment. Then Everard returned to the register. We need more than implication. We need movement. Cole leaves a yard. Someone records it. Someone receives it. Hugh walked to the window. There is a lower wharf east of Blackfriars where a merchant handles committee overflow deliveries. Overflow? Lydia asked. At least, that is what the reports call it. He looked at her over his shoulder. Mercer and Dane, coal factors. Everard's expression sharpened. You have reason to suspect them. I have reason to distrust reports that use vague words repeatedly. Lydia almost smiled. A useful beginning. Hugh turned fully toward her. Tonight, I intend to observe the wharf before anyone knows we are asking questions. You mean to go yourself? Yes. And Mr. Everard? If he agrees. Everard sighed. I already regret working for you. Hugh ignored him. Miss Harcourt, I am not asking you to come. Lydia heard the care in the sentence. He had learned that too. Good. Because it will be late. That is sensible. And your presence could be misunderstood. Also sensible. Hugh waited. Lydia picked up her blue coat and put it on. The warmth settled around her shoulders. Annie's polished button caught the light. What time? Hugh exhaled. You are impossible. No. I am deciding. Everard looked between them. Then we shall decide properly. No one travels alone. No one trespasses. No one seizes documents. We observe from public ground and leave if there is danger. Lydia nodded. Hugh did too. 7 o'clock, he said. A hired carriage, no crest. Lydia fastened the coat. And someone respectable enough to prevent Mr. Crane from inventing the evening for us later. Hugh's expression changed. Mrs. Ward, my widowed senior housekeeper. Good. Everard closed his notebook. Then it is settled. Lydia touched the thread case in her work bag. Inside it lay 3 numbers and 1 unanswered question. Somewhere beyond Mayfair, coal marked for the poor was moving through London. By nightfall, they intended to see where it went. At 7 o'clock that evening, Lydia left her lodging with the anonymous scrap locked inside her thread case and the thread case locked inside the small drawer beside her bed. She had chosen not to carry it. The numbers 412, 417, and 423 mattered too much to expose unnecessarily, and no one yet knew who had written them. Her silver thimble remained in the pocket of her grey dress. Her dark blue coat, newly returned and buttoned against the cold, carried no paper but Annie's memory and 1 unusually bright horn button. The hired carriage waiting at the curb bore no crest. Mrs. Ward, Hugh's widowed senior housekeeper, sat inside with rigid respectability and a wool shawl folded over one arm. She was perhaps 55, grey-eyed, composed, and entirely unimpressed by dukes. Miss Harcourt, she said as Lydia entered. His Grace tells me we are observing Cole. That is the plan. Then I hope Cole behaves more sensibly than men. Hugh, seated opposite, looked resigned. Mrs. Ward has managed Belgrave House for 14 years. Which is why it still functions, Mrs. Ward said. Lydia almost smiled. Outside, Everard climbed beside the hired driver, preferring the open air because he wanted an unobstructed view of streets and warehouse entrances. They left Mayfair without lamps brighter than necessary and travelled east through the winter-darkened city, the journey taking more than half an hour as traffic thickened near the river approaches. Hugh did not fill the silence. Lydia appreciated that. He had learned that her thoughts were not an empty room requiring occupation. When the carriage finally turned onto a public road overlooking a lower wharf east of Blackfriars, the driver slowed. Beyond a row of warehouses, river mist hung low over the Thames. Lanterns burned near loading doors. Hugh shifted slightly toward the window. Mercer and Dane. Lydia followed his gaze. The warehouse sign was painted plainly above a broad entrance. Men moved sacks from one covered area toward waiting carts. Everard gave a quiet signal from outside, and the carriage stopped far enough away to appear unremarkable. We remain here, Hugh said. No one leaves unless necessary. Lydia looked at him. That sounds suspiciously like an order. He caught himself. My recommendation. Accepted. Mrs. Ward settled back. Progress. Hugh ignored her. For nearly 15 minutes, nothing happened beyond ordinary warehouse labor. Lydia began to wonder whether the reports had merely been vague rather than dishonest. Then one worker rolled a sack beneath a stronger lantern. A white chalk mark showed clearly on the coarse fabric. A small crown. Beneath it, a curved bead. Hugh leaned forward. Belgrave. Lydia looked at him. You are certain? Yes. Could those sacks have been sold lawfully as surplus? Possibly. His restraint pleased her. But Committee Coal is not supposed to leave a relief yard without an authorized transfer entry. Another sack followed. Then another. Lydia counted silently. By the 7th, a private merchant cart had moved into position. No relief markings showed on the cart itself. The men loaded quickly. Hugh's hand closed over the top of his walking stick, though he made no move to open the carriage door. You want to confront them? Lydia kept her voice low. Yes. Do not. His gaze turned to her. You say that very easily. Because if you step out now, every man in that warehouse learns exactly what you know and exactly how frightened he should become. Mrs. Ward looked between them. Miss Harcourt is correct. Hugh exhaled once through his nose. I am surrounded by disloyalty. No, Lydia said. Only by women who dislike waste. The laugh escaped him before he could prevent it. Soft. Brief. Real. Lydia felt the sound more than she expected. She looked quickly toward the window. An 8th sack moved. Then a 9th. At the warehouse office, 2 men appeared in the doorway. One was broad and heavy-set, with a ruddy face. The other was narrower, older, and visibly agitated. They argued in low voices. Lydia could not hear words through the glass, but she watched the second man jab one finger toward the private cart, then toward the office. Which is Mercer? She asked. Hugh studied them. Arthur Mercer is the narrower man. He does not look pleased. No, the broad man seized Mercer's arm briefly, then released it. Mercer stepped back with clear disgust and went inside. Hugh's expression sharpened. Interesting. A 10th sack crossed the lantern light. Then an 11th. Lydia counted each one. 11. I have the same number, Hugh said. A man in a dark coat approached from the road carrying a red leather message case with a brass clasp. Lydia straightened. Hugh saw it too. One of the committee cases. The same type Mrs. Finch described. Yes. Not the same individual case necessarily. Lydia glanced at him. You remember that distinction too. I am trying to survive your standards. The messenger entered the office. Less than 5 minutes later, he came out without the case, mounted a hired cab, and left toward the west. Hugh looked toward Everard outside. The solicitor had seen it. He gave one small nod. Another figure approached the carriage on foot. Hugh's own footman, dressed plainly, stopped beside Everard and passed him a folded note. Everard read it, then leaned toward the carriage window. Your Grace. The man following Crane reports he went directly from Belgrave House to the private offices of Sir Rowland Ashcombe. Hugh's face became very still. Lydia felt the mystery tighten around them. After the confrontation this morning, she asked. Immediately afterward, Everard replied. Hugh looked back toward the warehouse where the 11th Belgrave-marked sack disappeared onto the merchant cart. We have diverted coal, a frightened merchant, a committee messenger, and Crane visiting the chairman. Lydia kept her voice precise. We have suspicion. Not proof connecting them all. Hugh's eyes met hers. You are becoming severe. Someone must. Lydia. He said her name before he realized it. She looked at him. The carriage seemed suddenly too small. Yes, Hugh. The answer escaped just as naturally. Neither spoke. Mrs. Ward turned her attention with exaggerated interest toward the opposite window. Everard, thankfully, was outside. Hugh's expression changed in a way Lydia could not name. Then another cartwheel struck a rut, and the moment broke. "We should leave," Lydia said. "Before they notice us." Hugh nodded. "Agreed." The next afternoon, Lady Wexham's assembly rooms glowed with chandeliers, polished brass, winter greenery, and the restrained elegance of wealthy people performing generosity in public. Lydia arrived by formal invitation from Lady Constance Wexham herself, delivered that morning through a proper messenger. That mattered. She was not present as Hugh's companion. She entered in her own right as a witness whose name had already been dragged into committee business. At the cloakroom, she surrendered her dark blue coat to the attendant and kept her silver thimble safely in her dress pocket. Mrs. Ward accompanied her into the main room, then moved discreetly aside. Hugh was already speaking with Everard near the rear. Samuel Pike stood behind Talbot Crane, carrying papers. When he saw Lydia, his face tightened. Sir Roland Ashcombe took the platform first. He spoke of duty, efficiency, proper stewardship, and the dangers of allowing emotion to interfere with organized charity. Lydia listened without moving. Then Crane stepped forward. "Recent confusion has unfortunately been encouraged by a person with no committee authority, no administrative experience, and no established connection to the families concerned." A murmur moved through the room. Heads turned toward Lydia. Crane did not name her immediately. He did not need to. A well-meant act, he continued, can easily become the beginning of reckless interference when private sentiment is mistaken for proof. Lydia felt the pressure of the room settle upon her. Seamstress. Unmarried. Poor enough to be dismissed, visible enough now to be judged. Hugh began to move. Lydia lifted one hand slightly. He stopped. She stepped forward alone. "Mr. Crane, may I ask one question?" His smile was thin. "You have already asked many. Then one more should not trouble you." A few faces shifted. Crane said, "Proceed." Lydia looked directly at him. "Why did you send a committee runner to ask Mrs. Finch whether she had issued token 417 3 days before Annie Moss was refused at the gate?" Silence fell so completely that Lydia heard the faint click of a teacup being set down. Crane's expression changed. Samuel Pike lowered his eyes. Hugh stepped forward now, not ahead of Lydia but beside her. "Answer Miss Harcourt." Sir Roland rose from his chair. "Your Grace, this matter would be better discussed privately." Hugh turned toward him. No, the reputation of the committee was defended publicly by attacking hers. Hugh's voice remained quiet. "The answer will not be buried behind a closed door." Lydia looked toward Crane. For 1 second, his gaze met hers. Then it moved past her toward the cloakroom entrance, where her dark blue coat had disappeared from sight. Behind him, Samuel Pike saw the look and turned away as though ashamed. Crane's glance toward the cloakroom lasted less than a second, but Lydia saw it. She had spent too many years sewing in rooms where women smiled while measuring one another for weakness to mistake anticipation for curiosity. Hugh saw her expression change. "What is it?" he asked quietly. "My coat." Before he could turn, Lady Wexham appeared at the edge of the gathering with a young cloakroom attendant beside her. The attendant carried Lydia's dark blue coat across both arms and looked close to tears. A murmur moved through the room. Crane did not look surprised. Lydia understood at once. Lady Wexham's face was controlled but cold. "Miss Harcourt, I must apologize. Your coat was removed from the cloakroom without your permission." Hugh's voice sharpened. "By whose instruction?" The attendant swallowed. "Mr. Crane's, Your Grace. He said you required it as committee evidence." Silence spread through the assembly room. Hugh turned to Crane. "Did you use my name?" Crane lifted his chin. "I believed the garment had become relevant to the claims being made." "That was not my question." "Yes." Hugh's face became very still. "You used my name to take Miss Harcourt's property." Sir Roland stepped forward. "Surely we need not inflate an unfortunate misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding occurred," Lydia said. Every eye moved toward her. She crossed to Lady Wexham and accepted the coat directly from the attendant. "You were told His Grace required it." The girl nodded quickly. Yes, miss. I'm sorry. You are not at fault. Lydia folded the coat over one arm and looked at Crane. He had chosen his ground. She intended to make him stand on it. Crane spread one hand with practiced reasonableness. Miss Harcourt has allowed an act of sentiment to become the foundation of a public accusation against respected men. The room has heard repeatedly that she sacrificed her only winter coat for a freezing child. Yet here the garment is returned to her within hours. Some might reasonably ask whether the gesture has been exaggerated. The cruelty of it was not loud. That made it worse. Several faces turned toward Lydia with the eager discomfort of people relieved that scandal belonged to someone else. Crane continued. Charity is not theatre. Nor should a private act be used to acquire moral authority over institutions one does not understand. Hugh took one step forward. Lydia touched his sleeve. No, he looked at her. Let me answer. He stopped immediately. Not because Crane deserved restraint. Because she had asked for it. Lydia faced the room. Annie Moss returned my coat because her mother feared I would freeze without it. She looked at Crane. Their kindness does not make mine false. The room quieted further. Lydia continued, but she did not raise her voice. I gave the coat before I knew a duke was watching. I did not know who sat inside that carriage. I did not expect reward, employment, invitation, or attention. I saw a child who had become too cold to shiver, and I acted. Crane's expression hardened. A moving account. It is not an account. It is what happened. Lydia reached into the pocket of her grey dress. Her fingers closed around the silver thimble that had remained with her throughout the day. She drew it out and held it in her palm. The small piece of silver was worn smooth in places by years of use. This belonged to my mother. After my father died, creditors took nearly everything else. I sold what I could. Furniture. Linen. Books. Jewelry that had any value at all. I kept this. Her voice remained steady. Not because it was expensive. Because it was useful. Because it reminded me that something worn can still have purpose if someone chooses to mend rather than discard it. No one interrupted. I have sewn for rent, food, candles, and survival. This morning, I lost my employment because I stopped for Annie. I have no reason to make poverty theatrical. It is inconvenient enough in private. Crane's face changed. Only slightly. Lydia returned the thimble to the pocket of her dress. And for the avoidance of further invention, Mr. Crane, I did not know His Grace was watching when I gave away my coat. Hugh's voice came from beside her. She did not. The certainty in it cut through the room. I witnessed the entire act from my carriage. Miss Harcourt never looked toward me. She did not know who I was until the clerk addressed me by title. Lady Wexham looked at Crane with open displeasure. Then your implication was false. Crane gave a strained smile. I raised a question. You used my name to take her coat, Hugh said. Then used the coat to attack her character. So Roland intervened again. Your Grace, the gathering is descending into emotional spectacle. Lydia put on the blue coat herself. Annie's polished horn button caught the chandelier light. No, she said. The spectacle began when a committee secretary decided an ordinary woman must be discredited before anyone examined the records. The words landed cleanly. Hugh did not smile, but she felt the pride in his silence. Crane's gaze flicked toward her, then toward Samuel Pike. The young clerk stood behind him with his head lowered and his hands clenched around a stack of papers. Lydia remembered his reaction to 417 in Belgrave House. He was afraid of something. Perhaps Crane. Perhaps himself. So Roland drew himself upright. Miss Harcourt, you continue to speak beyond your station. Hugh's expression turned cold. Lydia answered before he could. Truth has no station. The words were simple. That was why the room heard them. Lady Wexham stepped closer to Lydia. Not dramatically. Just enough to be seen choosing where she stood. Miss Harcourt was invited here by me, she said. Her presence requires no defense. Another subscriber shifted. Then another. No applause followed. Lydia was glad. Applause would have made the moment feel like performance. Silence was stronger. Crane seemed to realize he had lost the room, and that made him more dangerous. "Very well," he said. "Since we are to rely upon personal stories, perhaps we should also ask why token 417 has suddenly become so important." Hugh looked at him. "You are the man who questioned it before Annie reached the gate." "I questioned irregularities." "Then answer Miss Harcourt's earlier question. Why 417? Crane did not answer. The main doors opened. A Belgrave footman entered, crossed the room, and bowed to Hugh. "Your Grace." "A note from St. Anne's Lane. The messenger said it concerns the Moss family." Every trace of softness left Hugh's face. He took the folded paper, broke no seal because there was none, and read. Lydia watched his eyes move down the page. "What is it?" she asked. Hugh handed the note to her. The writing was uneven but careful. Mrs. Moss stated that Annie had returned home that morning with the coal, the dark blue coat, and token 417. She had given the token to her mother, who placed it inside a locked tea tin beside the bed. That afternoon, a well-dressed stranger had come to their rooms carrying a red leather message case with a brass clasp. He offered 5 sovereigns for the token. Lydia read the line twice. 5 sovereigns. Enough to tempt a family that counted bread, coal, rent, and medicine by the smallest margins. Mrs. Moss had refused. The stranger then warned that a widow with 2 children should be careful what trouble she invited. Lydia lifted her eyes. Crane had gone pale. Sir Roland's expression had become unreadable. Hugh took the note back and read the final lines aloud. "I still have number 417. I will not sell what nearly cost my child her life." The room held its breath. Hugh folded the note carefully. A brass token worth 1 sack of coal has suddenly become worth 5 sovereigns to someone who wants it gone. Crane recovered first. An unverified story. Lydia looked at him. "From the family you accused of possessing a stolen token." "I did not accuse them directly." "No," she said. "You preferred implication." Hugh turned to Lydia. "Miss Harcourt, I am going to St. Anne's Lane. Will you come?" he asked in front of everyone. Not as command. Not as assumption. Lydia thought of Annie, Mrs. Moss, Jamie's cough, the anonymous numbers locked inside her thread case, and the unknown person who knew coal disappeared when children were refused. "Yes." Crane stepped toward them. "Your Grace, you cannot intend to treat a widow's note as proof." Hugh stopped. No, his voice was quiet enough to make Crane listen. "I intend to ask why someone offered 5 sovereigns for evidence you insist does not matter." Lydia fastened the top button of her returned coat. Around her, the room that had been invited to judge her now watched Talbot Crane search for an answer he did not have. By the time Hugh's carriage reached St. Anne's Lane, the winter afternoon had begun to dim into an early London dusk. Mrs. Ward sat beside Lydia, as proper and composed as ever, while Mr. Everard travelled opposite Hugh with Mrs. Moss's note folded inside his case. No one spoke much. The 5 sovereign offer had changed the shape of the inquiry. Until that afternoon, they had followed altered records, missing pages, frightened clerks, and diverted coal. Now someone had tried to buy the one object that could prove Annie had carried a genuine claim to the gate. Mrs. Moss opened the door herself. She looked younger than Lydia had expected, no more than 32, but tired in the way of women who had learned to divide one worry into 6 smaller ones and survive each separately. Annie stood behind her, while Jamie, 5 years old and thin from a winter cough, sat wrapped in a blanket near the grate. The coal fire was modest but burning. Lydia felt a quiet relief at the sight. Annie smiled when she saw her. "Miss Harcourt." Lydia crouched to meet her eyes. "You look warmer." "Ma'am made me drink broth." "A tyrant." Annie nodded solemnly. "She made me finish it." Mrs. Moss almost smiled. Then her gaze moved to Hugh. "Your Grace." Hugh bowed his head. "Mrs. Moss. Thank you for sending the note. I nearly didn't." "Why did you?" Mrs. Moss looked at Annie. Because my girl came home wearing another woman's only coat and said a duke opened a gate that should never have been shut to her. I thought perhaps the truth deserved one more chance. Hugh's face went still. Tell us about the man. Mrs. Moss led them into the small front room. Mrs. Ward sat near Annie and Jamie, while Everard remained by the table with his notebook closed until invited to use it. He came after 1 o'clock, Mrs. Moss said. Well dressed, but not a gentleman born to it, I think. He carried one of those red leather message cases with a brass clasp. Lydia looked at Hugh. The same type Mrs. Finch described. Yes, Hugh said. Not necessarily the same individual case. Mrs. Moss continued. He asked whether Annie still had the token. I said she had given it to me. Then he put 5 sovereigns on the table. Lydia looked around the room. 5 sovereigns could have changed several months of this family's life. Coal. Rent. Food. A doctor if Jamie worsened. The offer had been calculated by someone who understood desperation. What exactly did he say? Everard asked. He said the token had caused confusion. He said it would be better for everyone if I surrendered it. And when you refused? Hugh asked. Mrs. Moss's mouth tightened. He told me a widow with 2 children should be careful what sort of trouble she invited. The room became very quiet. Hugh did not raise his voice. Did he threaten Annie directly? No. Jamie? No. Did he give his name? No. Did he touch the token? He never saw it. Hugh looked toward the small tea tin beside the bed curtain. A tiny iron lock hung from its clasp. May we see it? Mrs. Moss crossed to the tin, unlocked it, and removed a scrap of cloth. Inside lay token 417. She placed it on the table herself. Hugh did not touch it. Lydia saw the worn crown, the curved Belgrave mark, and the number unchanged from the morning before. It has remained here since Annie returned home. Everard asked. Yes. Annie spoke from beside Mrs. Ward. I gave it to Mam before she made me drink broth. Mrs. Moss gave her daughter a look. A dreadful injustice. Annie smiled. Hugh crouched near the table without reaching for the token. Mrs. Moss, keep it where you choose. No one will take it without your permission. The widow stared at him. I'm not accustomed to gentlemen asking. Hugh looked at Lydia before answering. I am learning. A knock sounded. Annie flinched. Hugh moved slightly between the children and the door, not dramatically, but Lydia noticed. Mrs. Moss called, Who is it? Mrs. Finch. Relief moved through the room. The silver-haired widow entered carrying her original brown ledger wrapped beneath one arm. Good, she said. You are all here. Hugh raised an eyebrow. Were you expecting us? No. I was expecting trouble. She placed the ledger on the table but kept one hand firmly over it. Someone searched my rooms while I was out buying lamp oil. Lydia's breath caught. Was anything taken? No. Mrs. Finch looked almost offended by the possibility. I had the ledger with me. You carried it to buy lamp oil? Everard asked. I am 60, Mr. Everard. Not foolish. Lydia almost smiled. Did they disturb anything else? Hugh asked. Drawers. Cupboards. Bedding. Nothing valuable was taken. Hugh's face hardened. Then they were not searching for valuables. Mrs. Finch opened the brown ledger herself. No. And I remembered something after you left yesterday. She turned several pages. The disputed token numbers are not random. Lydia moved closer. The delivery routes. Mrs. Finch nodded. Exactly. Look here. Token for 12 belonged to a widow on Mercer Row. Token for 17 belonged to the Moss household. Token for 23 belonged to a laborious family near the river streets. The same district? Lydia asked. The same delivery district and the same collection schedule. Hugh looked at her. The 3 numbers from the anonymous scrap. Yes. Lydia thought of the paper locked inside her thread case at her lodging. Then whoever wrote it knew the pattern. Or helped create it, Everard said. Annie looked from one adult to another. Does that mean someone chose which families wouldn't get coal? Hugh answered carefully. It may. We do not yet know enough to say more. A carriage stopped in the street below. Mrs. Moss went pale. Hugh moved to the window but remained behind the curtain. A liveried servant descended. Hugh's expression changed. Ashcombe. Sir Rowland's household. Moments later came another knock. Mrs. Moss looked frightened. Hugh did not answer for her. What do you wish to do? She stared at him, surprised by the question. Then she straightened. I want to hear what message he brought. Hugh nodded. Then we will hear it. He, Everard, and Lydia moved into the inner room with Mrs. Ward, while Mrs. Finch remained near the table with her ledger. Mrs. Moss opened the door. The servant entered carrying an envelope sealed in dark green wax. From Sir Rowland Ashcombe, madam. Mrs. Moss took it. Is there a reply? His instructions are that token 417 be surrendered for administrative examination. In exchange, your household will receive coal for the remainder of winter. Silence followed. Lydia could almost hear Hugh's anger in the next room, controlled because the choice still belonged to Mrs. Moss. The widow looked toward the locked tea tin. Tell Sir Rowland I already had the right to that coal. The servant bowed stiffly and left. When the outer door shut, Hugh returned. Mrs. Moss still held the sealed letter. Everard did not reach for it. It is yours, he said. You may keep it sealed, open it yourself, or ask someone else to open it in your presence. She studied the green wax. Would it be better proof if it stayed closed? The seal may help establish origin. The contents may establish purpose. The decision remains yours. Mrs. Moss held it out. Open it here. Read it aloud. I want everyone to hear the same words. Everard accepted the envelope only after she offered it. He examined the seal, broke it, and unfolded the single sheet. It states that due to questions concerning the validity of Token 417, the Stanley Winter Relief Committee is prepared to supply the Moss household with coal until the end of March, provided the disputed token is surrendered for administrative examination. Hugh's expression became colder. Signed, Sir Rowland Ashcombe. In his own hand. I cannot certify that without comparison. It bears his name and household seal. Mrs. Moss looked at the paper. Keep it. Everard waited. She understood. I give the letter to Mr. Everard for safekeeping and examination. The token stays with me. Understood. He placed the letter inside a separate compartment of his leather case and locked it. Token 417 remained on the table beside Mrs. Moss until she wrapped it again, returned it to the tea tin, and locked the clasp. Nothing moved without explanation. Nothing belonged to the powerful merely because they wanted it. When they finally left St. Anne's Lane, Everard and Mrs. Ward walked several paces ahead toward the carriage, leaving Hugh and Lydia briefly behind. Hugh looked toward the dim street. My father believed a duke could govern well through reports, committees, and appointed men. When I inherited, I believed the same. I told myself that proper administration was a form of care. Lydia said nothing. He continued. It was also distance. I did not have to see every gate that closed under my name. Lydia touched the silver thimble through her dress pocket. After my father died, respectable creditors came with correct papers and proper manners. No one shouted. No one called himself cruel. They simply removed one thing after another because every figure said they could. Hugh looked at her. That is why you distrust systems. I distrust people who believe correctness absolves them from seeing consequences. He absorbed the words without defense. And now? Now I think you are trying to look. For a moment, neither moved. The winter air hung between them, cold but strangely intimate. Hugh said quietly, I promise no one will take token 417 from Mrs. Moss. Lydia held his gaze. Can you make the same promise about me? He went still. Somewhere ahead, the carriage door opened. Lydia did not explain the question. She did not need to. Hugh's answer would come when fear tested what he had learned. Hugh did not answer Lydia's question until they had reached the carriage. Mrs. Ward had already taken her place inside. Everard stood near the door, giving them enough distance to preserve privacy without pretending not to notice the tension between them. Hugh looked at Lydia beneath the dim street lamp. "No," he said at last. "Not honestly." She held his gaze. "Then do not promise what you cannot keep." Something in his face tightened. "I can promise that I will not treat you as evidence." "That is not the same thing." No, he opened the carriage door and waited for her to enter before following. "Mrs. Ward glanced once at both of them and wisely turned her attention toward the window. Everard took the opposite seat this time, his leather case secure beside him, the Ashcombe letter locked inside its separate compartment. The carriage moved away from St. Anne's Lane. For several minutes, only the wheels spoke. Hugh sat very still. Then he said, "I do not want you alone tonight." Lydia turned toward him. "You have chosen an unfortunate way to begin." Mrs. Ward lowered her eyes. Everard became deeply interested in the fastening of his gloves. Hugh continued. Mrs. Finch's rooms were searched. A stranger offered 5 sovereigns for token 417. Sir Rowland sent a servant to demand it in writing. Crane publicly attacked your character and used my name to remove your coat without permission. All true. Then you understand the danger. I understand your fear. Hugh's jaw tightened. This is not merely fear. No. It is fear with a plan. His eyes flashed. You say that as though planning were a vice. It becomes one when the plan concerns another person who was not asked. Silence fell. Hugh looked toward the window, then back at her. I was going to propose that you remain at Belgrave House temporarily under Mrs. Ward's supervision until we know who searched Mrs. Finch's rooms and who offered money for the token. Mrs. Ward did not react, but Lydia saw her hands become still in her lap. And had you already arranged a room? Lydia asked. Hugh hesitated. That was answer enough. The blue sitting room could be prepared. Prepared? Yes. So this was not a suggestion. I said I was going to propose it. After deciding it. Hugh leaned forward. Lydia, someone is trying to remove evidence and frighten witnesses. I cannot ignore that. And I am not asking you to. Then why resist a reasonable precaution? Because it is reasonable to you. That is not an argument. It is the whole argument. Lydia's voice remained quiet, which made it sharper. Mrs. Moss kept token 417 because it belongs to her. Mrs. Finch kept her ledger because it belongs to her. Everard asks before opening letters that are not his. Yet you nearly decided where I should sleep because you were afraid. Hugh went still. Lydia continued. You have learned to ask before touching evidence. Do not make me the one thing in this inquiry that may be moved without consent. Everard looked away. Mrs. Ward did not. Hugh's face changed slowly, the anger draining from it and leaving something more difficult behind. That is not what I meant. I know. Lydia touched the silver thimble through her dress pocket. That is why it matters. The carriage passed beneath a row of lamps. Hugh looked down at his hands. I believed I was protecting you. You were trying to. And failing. You were repeating the same mistake in a kinder form. His eyes lifted. Which mistake? Believing good intention makes distance from consequences harmless. The word struck him. Lydia saw it. He said nothing for several seconds. Then, quietly, you were right outside Mrs. Moss's rooms. About what? I could not honestly promise not to make a decision about you when fear made me believe I knew best. Lydia waited. Hugh drew a breath. I am sorry. No qualification followed. No defense. That mattered more than eloquence. Thank you, she said. What would you choose? Hugh asked. Lydia looked at him. For tonight? For your safety. Your choice. She considered carefully. I returned to my own lodging. Hugh did not interrupt. Belgrave carriage may collect me tomorrow morning, but only if Mrs. Ward is inside. Mrs. Ward nodded once. Agreed. I will not travel alone while the inquiry continues. And I decide where I go unless there is immediate danger and no time to ask. Hugh's mouth tightened at the last condition, but he nodded. Agreed. You do not like it. No good. To Lydia's surprise, a brief laugh escaped him. You are merciless. Only when things matter. Mrs. Ward looked toward the ceiling. Everard coughed into one hand. The tension eased, but did not disappear. Lydia did not want it to. Trust that cost nothing was often another form of flattery. When the carriage reached her lodging, Hugh did not insist on entering. Mrs. Ward accompanied Lydia to the door, waited until the landlady admitted her, then returned to the carriage. Hugh watched from inside. Lydia saw him through the glass before the vehicle moved away. He had not won. He had changed. The distinction stayed with her long after she locked the door behind her. Less than 2 hours later, Hugh stood in Belgrave House study with Everard, 2 independent trustees of the Stanley Winter Relief Committee, the senior committee clerk, and the butler. No one searched Sir Roland Ashcombe's private residence. No one forced locks without authority. Hugh had suspended committee operations pending formal review, and the trustees had agreed to inventory official committee papers kept in the Mayfair offices. One trustee, Mr. Hales, held the second key to the records cabinet by committee rule. The first key had been kept by Crane. The lock was opened in the presence of witnesses after Mr. Hales produced his key and signed a written account of the inspection. Inside were subscription ledgers, delivery summaries, committee minutes, and one slim brown distribution book no one had mentioned before. Everard lifted it carefully. This is not the yard register. No, said the senior clerk. It is supplemental. Hugh looked at him. Supplemental to what? The man swallowed. I don't know, Your Grace. I have seen it on Mr. Crane's desk, but I was never asked to enter figures in it. Everard opened the book. The first pages contained token numbers. Beside many were single letters. R.C. Hugh felt something cold settle in him. Mrs. Finch's copied list. Everard opened his dispatch box and removed the labelled envelope containing the 23 disputed numbers. He read them aloud one by one. 17 appeared beside R, 6 beside C, token for 17 was there. Hugh stared at the mark. What does it mean? The senior clerk shook his head. I don't know. One trustee looked pale. Could it mean rejected? Everard answered before Hugh could. We do not guess. Hugh almost smiled without humour. Lydia would have said the same. He thought of her returning to her own lodging by choice. Of the line she had drawn between protection and possession. Of how difficult it had been not to cross it. Everard turned another page. These entries extend across 2 winters. Hugh's face hardened. Then Annie was not an accident. No one answered. The butler brought a written message from the committee office. Samuel Pike had been seen leaving shortly before the inventory began. He had not returned home. Hugh looked at Everard. Find him. Everard closed the supplemental book. Through proper means. Yes. Hugh's voice was quiet. Through proper means. He looked again at token 417 marked with the unexplained R. 3 pages were missing from one register. 23 disputed numbers appeared in another book. A frightened clerk had reacted to 417. And somewhere in London, Samuel Pike knew what the letters meant. At 9 the next morning, Lydia arrived at Belgrave House in the carriage she had chosen to accept, with Mrs. Ward beside her and the anonymous scrap still locked inside her thread case until the moment she entered Hugh's study. She had also accepted Everard's written terms for paid document comparison work. The rate was modest, the duties exact, and no gift was hidden beneath the arrangement. That mattered. Lydia placed the thread case on the desk herself. Hugh stood near the window. Everard opened his dispatch box but did not reach toward her. Whenever you are ready, Miss Harcourt. Lydia unlocked the case, removed the folded scrap, and held it for one moment. For 12, for 17. For 23, ask who receives the coal when the children are refused. This paper has remained in my thread case since I found it inside my returned coat yesterday afternoon. The thread case remained locked in my lodging overnight. She gave it directly to Everard. And it now passes from Miss Harcourt to me, he said. He placed the scrap inside a separate labelled envelope and locked it in a dispatch box beside, but not loose among, Mrs. Finch's copied list of 23 disputed numbers. Hugh watched Lydia. Satisfied. For the moment. I begin to treasure those words. A knock interrupted them. The butler entered. Your Grace. Mr. Samuel Pike is downstairs. He says he came of his own accord and must speak before he loses his courage. Hugh's expression sharpened. The previous night, Pike had been seen leaving the committee offices before the inventory began and had not returned to his lodging. Everard had ordered discreet inquiries through ordinary channels, but no one had found him. Now he had come voluntarily. Bring him in, Hugh said. Samuel Pike entered pale, exhausted, and visibly frightened. His hat shook slightly in his hands. Lydia recognized the same young clerk who had flinched at the number 417 in this room and lowered his eyes at Lady Wexham's bazaar. Hugh gestured toward a chair. Sit. Pike shook his head. I'd rather stand, Your Grace. Why? Because if I sit, I may lose whatever nerve brought me here. Hugh did not press him. Then stand. Pike looked at the supplemental distribution book on Everard's desk. You found it? Yes, Everard said. What do the letters mean? Pike swallowed. Are means reassigned? The room went still. And see? Lydia asked. He looked at her. Collected. Hugh's voice became quiet. Collected by whom? Mercer and Dane. Lydia felt the pattern close another inch around them. Explain it from the beginning, Everard said. Only what you personally know. Pike nodded. Certain token numbers were selected by delivery district. Genuine tokens. Mr. Crane instructed the yard that if those numbers appeared, they were to be called irregular, copied, expired, or already redeemed. The families were turned away. The same numbers were entered in the supplemental book. I meant the corresponding coal had been reassigned for merchant collection. C meant Mercer and Dane had already collected it. Before the families arrived. Hugh asked. Sometimes days before. Hugh turned away. Lydia saw his hand tighten against the mantle. Coal bought partly with his subscriptions. Token stamped with his family mark. Children rejected under the authority of his name. Who gave Crane the authority? Everard asked. Pike stared at the floor. Sir Roland. How do you know? I copied memoranda from him. Where are those memoranda? Pike's face changed. Gone. Hugh looked at him. Gone how? Burned. The word fell heavily. After the numbers were entered, Mr. Crane ordered the instructions burned in the committee office grate. Everard's voice was exact. Did you burn them? Pike closed his eyes briefly. Some of them. Lydia felt no easy pity. Fear did not make harm unreal. It only explained the shape of the trap. Then those papers are destroyed, she said. Pike looked at her. Yes. They cannot return later because we need them. Shame crossed his face. No good, Everard said. Then we build nothing upon evidence that no longer exists. Pike nodded. Hugh faced him again. Why did you obey? My mother is widowed. I have 2 younger sisters. Crane told me if I refused, I would be dismissed without a character. No respectable office would take me. And why speak now? Pike looked at Lydia. Because I watched you yesterday. She went still. At the bazaar. Yes. Mr. Crane tried to make your kindness look shameful, and you didn't let him. I kept thinking that I had spent 2 years telling myself fear left me no choice. His voice roughened. Then I thought of Animos outside that gate. Hugh did not absolve him. You will answer truthfully for what you did. You will also be protected from retaliation while you give truthful testimony. Those are separate matters. Pike looked at him with startled relief. Yes, Your Grace. Lydia watched him gather himself. There is something else, he said. The paper in Miss Harcourt's coat. Lydia's attention sharpened. You wrote it? Yes. The answer came without evasion. The numbers 412, 417, and 423. Yes. How did you put it in my coat? I didn't. Lydia waited. Pike continued. After His Grace intervened at the yard, I learned Thomas Briar had escorted Annie and the coal to St. Anne's Lane. Later I saw Briar returning with a folded parcel. I recognized the coat because Annie had been wearing it when she left. He told me Mrs. Moss was sending it back to the woman who helped her daughter. Hugh's gaze hardened. And you gave him the scrap? Yes. I told him I couldn't safely send anything through committee offices. I asked him to place the folded paper inside the inner pocket before delivering the coat to Belgrave House. He didn't read it. Everard opened a second folder. Thomas Briar confirmed that this morning. He reported that a frightened committee clerk handed him a folded scrap and asked him to put it inside the coat. Briar did not know its contents. He identified you from description when we questioned him. Pike bowed his head. Lydia felt something inside her settle. The scrap had not appeared by magic. Its path was complete. Pike to Briar. Briar to the coat. Coat to Belgrave House. Lydia to her thread case. Lydia to Everard. Why those 3 numbers? She asked. They were the first 3 in one targeted delivery route that I personally saw marked for reassignment. I thought if someone compared them with the original issuance records, they might see the pattern. Why not give all 23? Because I didn't know Mrs. Finch had kept her own list. And because I was afraid 3 numbers were already enough to expose me. Hugh's eyes rested on him. The red leather cases. Pike nodded. There are several identical ones. Crane assigns them to runners. The man who questioned Mrs. Finch went to Mrs. Moss with the 5 sovereign offer and carried a case to Mercer and Dane is Crane's regular paid messenger. Lydia remembered the stranger at Blackfriars, the case disappearing into the office. So it was not one impossible object in several places. Pike looked confused. Hugh almost smiled. Miss Harcourt has standards. Severe ones, Everard said. Pike drew another breath. There is an account book at Mercer and Dane. Mr. Dane keeps it in the office safe. It records payments from private coal sales into a committee fund that doesn't appear in the public accounts. Hugh's gaze sharpened. Who controls the fund? Withdrawals require 2 countersignatures. Whose? Sir Roland Ashcombe and Talbot Crane. Silence followed. Everard was first to move. You are certain? I copied payment references into the supplemental book. Have you seen the account ledger yourself? Yes. Recently. 3 weeks ago. Hugh looked toward the window. Then we need it before they know Pike has spoken. Everard closed his notebook. We do not seize it. We send formal notice through proper channels requiring preservation of the company books and request voluntary production before witnesses. Hugh nodded, impatient but controlled. Do it. By late afternoon, the answer came. Arthur Mercer had received Everard's letter. He did not respond through Dane. He sent his own solicitor. Mercer would surrender the account book voluntarily the next morning before independent witnesses. He asked for no promise of immunity, only that his cooperation be accurately recorded because he believed Dane and Crane intended to make him the sole scapegoat. Lydia read the message twice. Hugh stood beside her. He may still change his mind. Yes. Or the book may not say what Pike believes. Yes. Hugh looked at her. You are very difficult to impress. Evidence should survive disappointment. A quiet smile touched his mouth. Then Everard took the message back. Tomorrow morning, Mercer brings the ledger. After that, we decide when and where the truth is shown. Lydia thought of the locked gate, the child sitting outside it, and the register that said no refusal had occurred. At the yard, she said. Hugh looked at her. Why? Because that is where the lie became cold enough for a child to feel it. No one spoke. Lydia continued. Do not confront Sir Rowland in another private room. Do not let Crane turn this into a disagreement between gentlemen. Open the gates. Bring the records. Let the families who were refused see whether their names mattered after all. Hugh held her gaze for a long moment. And you? I will be there. Lydia. Do not ask me to remain behind while everyone else carries the truth I helped uncover. He went still. Then, quietly, I was going to ask whether you were certain. She looked at him. I am. Hugh nodded. Then I will not stand in your way. Lydia's voice softened. No. Stand beside me. For one heartbeat, the Duke of Stonleigh looked entirely unguarded. That, he said, I can do. The gates opened before the first family arrived. That was Hugh's order, and by 8 o'clock on the fourth morning of the inquiry, both iron leaves of the Stonleigh Winter Relief Yard stood wide beneath a pale January sky. No child waited outside. No clerk hid behind a shutter. Coal sacks stood in counted rows beneath the sheds, each allotment recorded twice by men who had not served under Crane's direct authority. Lydia entered beside Mrs. Ward wearing her dark blue coat, the same coat that had crossed from her shoulders to Annie, from Annie to Mrs. Moss, from Mrs. Moss to Thomas Briar, and from Briar back to Belgrave House. Her silver thimble remained in the pocket of her grey dress. She carried no evidence. That was deliberate. Mrs. Finch arrived with her original brown ledger beneath one arm and her own hand firmly over it. Mrs. Moss came with Annie, carrying token 417 wrapped in cloth inside her reticule until the moment she chose to show it. Jamie remained at home with a neighbour, his cough better but not gone. Samuel Pike stood near Mr. Everard, pale and rigid. Arthur Mercer had arrived shortly after 7 with his own solicitor and the Mercer and Dane account book. He surrendered it voluntarily before 2 independent witnesses. Everard recorded the transfer aloud, placed the ledger under his custody, and gave Mercer no promise of immunity. Hugh had insisted on that. Cooperation was not innocence. By 8:30, subscribers, 2 committee trustees, Lady Wexham, several relief applicants, and men who had worked the yard all stood within sight of the open gates. Sir Rowland Ashcombe arrived last. Talbot Crane came with him. Both men stopped when they saw the table set in the middle of the yard. On it lay no theatrical arrangement. Only records. The surviving relief yard register with 3 pages missing. The supplemental distribution book. Mrs. Finch copied list of 23 disputed numbers. The anonymous scrap in its separate envelope. Crane's false statement bearing Mrs. Finch's name. Sir Rowland's letter to Mrs. Moss. The Mercer and Dane account ledger. Nothing burned had returned. Nothing destroyed had been restored because it was convenient. What no longer existed would remain gone. Hugh stood beside Lydia rather than before her. Sir Rowland looked from him to the table. Your Grace, this is beneath the dignity of your position. Hugh's voice was calm. A child was refused coal beneath the authority of my name. I am less concerned with dignity than truth. Sir Rowland's mouth hardened. And you intend to discover truth from seamstresses, widows, and frightened clerks. Lydia felt the old hierarchy in the question. Before she could answer, Mrs. Finch stepped forward. You may begin with my ledger. She placed it on the table herself and opened to the relevant pages. Everard did not touch it. Token for 16, she said. Issued to Mrs. Gibbons, laundress, 1 infant daughter. Token 417. Issued to the Moss household, widow with 2 children. Token 418. Caleb Price, former footman, elderly, living alone. She turned more pages. Every disputed number on my list was issued properly. Crane gave a short breath. A private ledger proves only what one woman chose to write. Mrs. Finch looked at him. Then I am fortunate the committee kept another book. Everard opened the surviving yard register. 7 of the 23 disputed numbers remain on pages that were not removed. Everyone is marked supplied. Lydia looked toward Mrs. Gibbons, who stood near the gate holding a baby wrapped beneath her shawl. The laundress lifted her chin. I wasn't supplied. Another voice followed. Caleb Price. Nor was I. A third family answered. Then a fourth. The sound moved through the yard, not loudly, but steadily. Sir Roland raised one hand. Memory is unreliable. Agreed, Everard said. Which is why we also have this. He opened the supplemental distribution book found during the witnessed inventory of official committee papers. 17 disputed token numbers are marked R6 are marked C. Hugh looked toward Pike. Mr. Pike. The young clerk swallowed. Are means reassigned? His voice shook once, then steadied. C means collected. Crane stepped forward. The boy is terrified. He will say anything to protect himself. Pike looked at him. Something changed in the young man's face. No, sir. For 2 years I said nothing to protect myself. The yard became silent. Who gave the instructions? Everard asked. Mr. Crane. Crane's complexion changed. On whose authority? Pike looked toward Sir Roland. He's. Sir Roland gave a contemptuous laugh. A junior clerk who admits destroying papers is not a trustworthy witness. Correct, Lydia said. Every face turned toward her. That is why no one is asking the yard to rely on him alone. Everard opened the envelope containing the anonymous scrap. Mr. Pike has also admitted writing this warning. He gave it to Thomas Breyer, who placed it in Miss Harcourt's returned coat. Mr. Breyer has confirmed the transfer. Pike looked toward Lydia. The 3 numbers were the first in one delivery route that I personally saw marked for reassignment. Mrs. Finch turned her ledger. For 12, for 17. For 23, same district. Same collection schedule. Sir Roland's face remained composed, but Lydia saw the strain now. An unfortunate pattern does not prove theft. Everard placed one hand on the Mercer and Dane account ledger. Then let us discuss where the coal went. Arthur Mercer stepped forward. His face was grey with shame and fear. My firm received Stanley marked relief coal for private resale. A murmur moved through the yard. You admit that? Hugh asked. Yes, Your Grace. Why? Mercer looked toward Sir Roland and Crane. At first, I was told the committee had excess stock and needed revenue to cover subscription shortfalls. Later, I understood families were being refused so the coal could be redirected. Crane snapped, You liar. Mercer turned on him. You told Dane I would carry the blame if the inquiry reached the accounts. That silenced him. Everard opened the merchant ledger. This book records payments from private coal sales into a committee fund omitted from the public accounts. Withdrawals required 2 counter-signatures. He looked at Sir Roland. Then Crane. Yours. Sir Roland's control finally cracked. You understand nothing of administration. Subscriptions failed. Promises had already been made. Coal had to be paid for. I preserved the committee when sentimental patrons failed to honor pledges. Hugh's eyes narrowed. By refusing fuel to families whose tokens were genuine. By redirecting resources where they could sustain the operation. Mrs. Moss stepped forward. Annie held her hand. My daughter nearly froze outside your gate. So Roland looked at her with irritation rather than shame. That was the moment the yard changed. Not because he confessed. Because everyone saw what mattered less to him than his own explanation. Lydia felt Hugh beside her go very still. Everard continued. The accounts also show withdrawals unrelated to committee expenses. Payments toward Ashcombe obligations. Separate concealed commissions linked to Mr. Crane. Crane looked at Sir Roland. You said the private withdrawals had been covered. Sir Roland turned sharply. Be silent. Too late. The words had already landed. Lydia watched Crane realize it. Hugh said quietly, Thank you, Mr. Crane. Crane's face went white. Mrs. Moss reached into her reticule and removed the cloth-wrapped token. She unwrapped it herself and placed 417 on the table. This is what my daughter carried. Everard produced Sir Roland's opened letter from his locked leather case. Mrs. Moss authorized me to open this in her presence and later transferred it to my custody. It offers coal for the remainder of winter if token 417 is surrendered for administrative examination. So Roland said nothing. Crane did. You told me the letter would settle the matter privately. The sentence escaped before he understood what he had said. No one moved. Hugh looked at him. And there it is. So Roland's face filled with cold fury. Coward. Lydia stepped forward then. Not because Hugh asked. Not because anyone invited her. Because this had begun with an invisible child and a lie recorded as absence. You depended on every person beneath your notice remaining silent, she said. So Roland looked at her with contempt. You imagine yourself important because a duke chose to listen. Lydia did not flinch. No. Mrs. Finch kept the names. Mrs. Moss kept the token. Mr. Pike finally told the truth. Mr. Mercer preserved the accounts. Mr. Everard followed the records. His Grace learned not to trust reports more than people. I am only one person who refused to look away. Hugh turned toward her. The emotion in his face was so unguarded that Lydia had to draw one quiet breath before continuing. Your mistake was believing dignity belonged only to people whose names were already known. Silence followed. Then Hugh faced the yard. The Stanley Winter Relief Committee is dissolved as of this moment. Crane stared at him. So Roland remained rigid. Temporary independent supervisors will manage distribution. Every documented household wrongly refused will receive its full allotment beginning today. I will advance the necessary funds personally so no family waits for civil recovery. So Roland gave a bitter laugh. And you think society will choose this collection of widows, clerks, and tradesmen over a baronet? Lady Wexham stepped forward. I already have. Another subscriber joined her. Then another. No applause came. Lydia was grateful. Applause would have cheapened what happened next. A clerk called token for 16. Mrs. Gibbons moved forward with her infant. Her token was checked against Mrs. Finch's ledger and the surviving records. A sack of coal was loaded onto a cart. No one called her confused. No one told her to leave. Caleb Price followed. Then another family. Annie watched the open gates. Lydia watched Annie. Hugh came to stand beside her. You were right, he said. About what? Distance is not care. Lydia looked toward the families receiving what had always been theirs. Not by itself. Hugh turned to the crowd. There is something else. His voice carried across the yard. This scheme operated under my patronage and beneath my family mark. I did not order it. I did not know of it. But ignorance does not remove responsibility for what a man permits to continue under his name. So Roland stared at him. Crane lowered his eyes. Hugh continued. I trusted reports. I trusted respectable titles. I failed to stand near enough to the consequences. That failure is mine. Lydia felt the words reach deeper than any public defense of her could have done. Hugh was not rescuing his reputation. He was accepting damage to it because truth required it. So Roland resigned before noon, but resignation did not stop civil recovery proceedings or further lawful review. Crane was removed from every Stanley-sponsored post and abandoned by several patrons who had witnessed the evidence. No one dragged either man away. Consequence did not need spectacle to be real. Near the table, Mrs. Moss took token 417 back after inspection, wrapped it again, and returned it to her reticule. It remained hers. A coal cart was prepared for St. Anne's Lane. Annie watched it go. Will the gate stay open now? She asked. Hugh crouched so they were eye to eye. That is the intention. Annie considered him. You should check. Hugh looked toward Lydia. Yes. His voice softened. I should. Later, as the yard continued working, Hugh stood with Lydia beneath the pale winter light. When this is finished, he said, there is something I wish to ask you. Her heart changed rhythm. About the committee? No, she looked at him. For once, the Duke of Stanley seemed uncertain. Then wait until it is truly finished. Hugh inclined his head. I will. And because he did not press, because he did not decide that wanting an answer entitled him to have one, Lydia stayed beside him while the gates remained open. 3 weeks after the reckoning at the relief yard, Lydia stood before the same iron gates and watched them open before anyone had to ask. The change was not grand enough for fashionable London to admire. There were no garlands, no orchestra, and no speeches prepared for newspapers. There were only practical things. 2 clerks now checked every issued token against a second independent record. Every refusal had to be written down with a reason and witnessed. Coal was counted when it arrived and counted again when it left. No single man controlled both issuance and distribution. Mrs. Finch had agreed to advise the temporary supervisors, although she had informed Hugh that anyone who called her elderly in a patronizing tone would be removed from her presence immediately. Mrs. Moss had received every sack owed to her household. Jamie's cough had improved gradually with warmth and rest, though no one pretended a few weeks of cold could erase an entire winter of hardship. Token 417 remained wrapped in cloth inside the locked tea tin beside Mrs. Moss's bed. When Hugh suggested that it might one day belong in an archive, Mrs. Moss had answered, "It belongs where the truth happened." He had accepted that without argument. Samuel Pike had lost his place with the old committee. After completing his testimony, he had been found junior accounting work through Mr. Everard with an employer who knew the whole story. No one called him innocent. No one denied that fear had shaped his choices. He had been given the harder thing instead. A chance to live honestly after admitting where he had failed. Sir Roland Ashcombe's resignation had not ended the matter. Civil recovery of diverted funds continued, and further lawful review had begun. Talbot Crane had lost every position connected with Stanley patronage, and several patrons who had once welcomed him now found reasons not to receive him. Lydia considered that fitting. Respectability had protected him while no one looked closely. Once people did, it proved surprisingly fragile. Her own life had changed more quietly. With the wages earned from Everard's document comparison work, the money she had saved before losing her place with Mrs. Bell, and a small formal loan from Mrs. Finch at 6% interest, Lydia had rented an upstairs workroom with 2 other seamstresses. Hugh had not bought it. He had not arranged it secretly through someone else. He had not sent expensive tools or fabric under another name. He had given her the names of 3 reputable suppliers only after she asked. That restraint had done more to earn her trust than any jewel could have managed. "You are frowning at the gates," Hugh said beside her. Lydia turned. He wore a dark winter coat and no visible sign of impatience, though she knew by now that stillness did not always mean ease. "I am thinking." "You often do that before saying something difficult. And you often delay saying what you mean by making observations." "That sounds like criticism." "It is an observation." His mouth curved. The smile still felt rare enough to matter, though it appeared more often around her now. Lydia looked toward the yard. Mrs. Gibbons had just received her weekly coal allotment without challenge. Caleb Price was speaking with one of the new clerks, holding his token in a gloved hand. Annie stood near her mother, watching a cart being loaded for St. Anne's Lane. "The system is working," Hugh said. "Today." "You still do not trust systems." "I trust arrangements that expect human beings to fail and leave enough light for others to notice." Hugh followed her gaze. "You changed the way I think about power." Lydia shook her head. "No. I reminded you to look down the road. From inside my carriage. You were very comfortable. I was reading a committee memorandum, which said no child had been refused." He winced. An especially humiliating detail. One of several. His soft laugh warmed the cold air between them. Then the final coal cart for the noon distribution rolled through the opened gate, and Hugh became serious. "Lydia." Her heart changed rhythm. She knew that tone. "Yes? May I ask now?" 3 weeks earlier, at this same yard, he had said there was something he wished to ask when the matter was truly finished. She had told him to wait. He had. No pressure. No flowers delivered to her lodging. No grand declarations arranged before witnesses. Only patience. "You may." Hugh did not reach for her hand. That mattered. he stood beside her while clerks worked in the yard and Mrs. Finch pretended not to watch from the office window. "I have spent most of my life believing protection meant removing danger before it could reach the people in my care," he said. "Then you taught me that protection without consent can become another locked gate." Lydia felt the silver thimble in the pocket of her dress. "That sounds alarmingly like gratitude." "It is not gratitude." His gaze held hers. "Gratitude is part of it. Respect is more. Admiration is more still. But none of those words are enough." He paused, and Lydia saw the man beneath the title, uncertain because power could not command what mattered most. "I love you." The simplicity of it struck harder than any grand speech could have done. Hugh continued. "I do not love you because you gave away a coat. I love the woman who saw a child everyone else had learned not to see. The woman who corrected a duke when he forgot a token did not belong to him. The woman who can be frightened and still refuse obedience to fear. The woman who insists truth remain exact even when anger would make exaggeration easier." Lydia's throat tightened. "You prepared this? For 3 weeks. That explains the unusual coherence. I was afraid you might interrupt. I still may. Then I will be brief." At last, he extended one hand. "Open. Not taking. Offering. Will you marry me?" Lydia looked at his palm and remembered the man who had once nearly decided where she should sleep because fear had convinced him he knew best. She remembered his apology. More importantly, she remembered that he had changed his behavior afterward. "There are conditions," she said. His expression shifted. "Of course there are. My work remains mine. Yes. I will not become an ornament for committees. I would pity the committee. Hugh. Forgive me. Continue. You do not make decisions for my safety without asking unless there is immediate danger and no time. Agreed. You visit what bears your name. You do not trust distance simply because the reports are neat." His face grew solemn. "Agreed. And you never call Mrs. Finch elderly in a patronizing tone. That is self-preservation, not sacrifice." Lydia's mouth trembled into a smile. Then she placed her hand in his. "And yes." Hugh went utterly still. "Yes? Do not make me repeat myself merely to enjoy the sound." His fingers closed around hers with extraordinary care. "I would not dare." From the office window came Mrs. Finch's voice. "You certainly would." Lydia laughed, openly this time, and Hugh did too. 6 weeks later, they married quietly in a London chapel. Mrs. Finch attended in dark plum silk and criticized the pew cushions. Mrs. Moss came with Annie and Jamie, whose cough had eased but not vanished. Mrs. Ward stood with dignified composure. Everard looked almost cheerful. Samuel Pike remained near the back, solemn and grateful without presuming forgiveness. Before the ceremony, Hugh asked Lydia one final question. "Would you like your mother's thimble set into a keepsake?" Lydia looked at him. "No good." She raised an eyebrow. "Good? You still use it?" The answer settled warmly inside her. "Yes." "Then it should remain yours to use." He understood. That was the point. By late spring, Lydia's workroom employed 3 other seamstresses in addition to the 2 women with whom she had first opened it. Payment terms were written clearly. Wages were fair. Orders from clients who considered delay in payment a privilege of rank were politely refused. Lydia chose not to chair any relief committee. She did agree to review quarterly reports and visit the yards when she wished. Hugh visited them himself. Sir Rowland's civil case continued. Crane remained excluded from Stanley patronage. Justice had not transformed the world into perfection. It had simply made certain lies harder to tell. One afternoon at Belgrave House, Hugh found Lydia near an open window repairing the inner pocket of her dark blue coat. "That coat has survived an unreasonable amount of history," he said. Lydia pushed her mother's silver thimble firmly onto her finger. "Useful things often do. Does the pocket need replacing?" "No," she guided the needle through the worn cloth. "It needs mending." Hugh sat beside her and watched without interfering. Outside, a carriage passed through the square. Somewhere farther away, gates were opening for families carrying numbered tokens that now meant what they promised. Lydia finished the final stitch, tied the thread, and slipped the silver thimble from her finger. It rested in her palm, small and bright with years of use. Hugh offered his hand, open as it had been the day he asked her to marry him. Lydia kept the thimble safely in one hand and placed the other in his. Then she turned toward the life she had chosen for herself.